guys, how's it going? Welcome to my channel. My name is Alex, and this is the Airsoft Scientist. So I'm sure as a lot of you have during this unprecedented time, you've been cooped up inside. I took that opportunity to get back into something that I haven't done in quite a while, which is deal with my airsoft gun. So this one that I'm about to show you it wasn't mine for quite a while. I got it used way back in high school, and then I ended up giving it up for a while. So I haven't done anything to this gun yet, really, before now. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to go through it, diagnose all the terrible things that have happened to it since, not just before I got it, but since it's been sitting for a while. Go through all of that with you guys, and then go through how we're going to upgrade it. So it's going to be a series of videos. This first one's just going to be how to tear it down, go through all the individual pieces, really diagnose what's wrong with it, and then the other videos will each be incrementally going through the gun and upgrading it piece by piece. So as part of all this is gathering all the pieces that I wanted to incorporate into the gun, all the upgrades I wanted to make to it. I started to realize that there weren't a lot of really good hard facts behind why one piece is better than another, or why one method for hop-up is better than another, or just the common sense things. And more than that, the science behind it. Airsoft guns are, I'm just going to say it, more complicated in many ways than even a real firearm. There's more moving pieces, there's a lot of smaller pieces, there's things there to make sure that the gun is safe to use, because you're dealing with electric current or gas or high pressure air, and there's a lot of things that people just really haven't got into and broken down so that people can understand them. So I was going through YouTube, going through the reviews for some of the pieces that I was getting, and didn't really feel like a lot of them had a good understanding of why what they were doing was good for the gun or bad for the gun, or at least not completely. So I wanted to make a channel that addressed that. I'm a huge nerd, self-proclaimed, and I really love understanding the why behind some of the things that I'm putting in this gun. So without further ado, I'm going to show you this, which is a classic Army M15A4. This thing is super old, and as you can see, it's been beat a little bit. There's nothing too fancy on it. That's not right. There's supposed to be a spring in there. This rattles all over the place. I actually hate these types of handguards. This rattles, that's not good. And then you'll notice that the front iron sight has been cut off and kind of ground down. So I'm gonna change the camera view. We're gonna do a top-down view, and I'm gonna start taking this thing apart and diagnosing everything that's wrong with it with you guys, to try to show you what we can do to make it better. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. Alrighty, so we've got the gun down here on this mat. So first things first, this is a Real Avid gun mat. It's for doing gun maintenance, stuff like that. It's hydrophobic, it's oil phobic as well, so basically all the oil that you would spill on this would bead up. Same thing with grease, super easy to clean. Also protects your table and your workspace, so I'm a big fan of having these. They don't scratch. They just make things really easy. This one also happens to have a tray off to the right, just off camera, over here, that has some like trays for different pieces, as well as a slight or super small magnetic one. I don't use that as much. I actually use this. So this is a Husky magnetic dish. So if I was to put like this right here, this little pin, it sticks to this really easy, right? So it's super magnetic, things don't fall out. It makes it really easy to organize all the different pieces you have. So definitely recommend having something like this, just because there's gonna be a lot of pieces here and you don't wanna lose them. So definitely recommend one of those. Have all our tools over here, some more off camera. And then I also have these, which are just Grease Monkey nitrile gloves. They're latex free, so that's super rad. I recommend having these just to protect your hands as well as the gun. You don't want the gun leaving anything in your hands, and you certainly don't want your hands leaving anything in the gun. So definitely gonna start with these as well. We'll put these on and then we'll get started. All right, so we got those set up. Let's actually get into taking apart this classic Army M15A4. So first things first, I'm going to take off a little bit of the furniture just to make this easier to deal with. So I'm going to start with this front handguard. Remember, this wiggles a lot. I don't like that, so we're going to replace this with something more solid. But let me show you how this is put together and why you might want to change it or not. So this gun started out as front wire. So I'm going to take this off by pulling this ring back like so. You can see it's kind of pulling back there. And take that guy out and that just slides off like so. And you can see that there is a catch on the front right here. So a little lip that this guy goes into like so. And then this back part would pull back and you'd be able to slot that in there. So here, let me take the mag out first. We should have done that first. So mag out, just an M4 mag standard. There we go. So now you can see that a little bit better. So we have this front lip this guy hooks into, and we pull this ring back and the back would slot in. You'll also notice this little channel right here on the bottom of the outer barrel. Just for your reference, this is called a handguard. This is called an outer barrel, and this extends all the way through to over here. So this is all one solid piece. But you'll see this little indent right here. This little indent is where the front wiring would come out on this AEG, and that's where it actually started. I'll get into that in a bit. But that's where the front wiring would come out, and you would have your battery sitting in here. I don't like that, especially since if you're in a longer game and you're actually having to change batteries. This is cumbersome. I don't like it, and it doesn't let me put 11.1 lipos in as well. 11.1 lipos are typically larger. Even the butterfly ones have a hard time sitting in here. So I don't like that. We're going to change it. But that's where those wires would come out. They would then extend through the receiver and into our V2 gearbox sitting in there through some front ports that I'll show you when we get to that point. But I changed that, and I'll show you how we make that rear wire so you can have a stock battery, which I am a big fan of. We'll do some changes there as well. All right, so we took off the bottom part of the handguard. Now we need to take off the top. Same process, just a little bit stiffer. The top handguard is not meant to be able to be removed as easily, so it's a little stuck in there. So we're gonna really have to pull on this. There we go, and it comes out eventually. But same idea. I'll show you the handguards here. Same, you have this lip here, right? Lip right there that slots into the front, and then a lip right here that is held by the tension on this back. All right, same idea here. Front lip, back lip. So you'll notice I have a handguard on here. We're gonna keep that, absolutely. And you'll see these plates right here keeping this Picatinny rail on. This is called M-lock. So you can tell it's M-lock just because they're cutouts like this. Keyhole would look like a keyhole, like an old school keyhole where one side would be larger and it would slide in. We're going to be replacing these handguards and this front assembly and the outer barrel on this gun. So I'll show you what we're going to do there later, but we're going to replace it with a free floating M-lock handguard that I think is going to come out a lot better and make this look a lot cleaner, as well as not rattle around when you're trying to be stealthy. So that's what these are. Okay, so we'll put these away. We'll keep going. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take off the butt stock, right? So I'm going to take off the stock assembly. These ones are super easy. I like this one, nothing wrong with it, but it is the standard one that came with the gun. So you would pull this down and it extends and it's adjustable and it's all good. But if you listen, that sucks. That rattles around way too much. I'm going to show you how to fix that. That's something that a lot of stocks are going to have a problem with. This one, just because of its age and the fact that it was just the standard one, they're not precision machining these, and I don't blame them, but there is a way to fix that. We're going to be replacing this buttstock with one that can hold the 11.1 lipos. We're going to be rear wiring this gun, so I'm going to take this off, and then I'll get into how to stop that rattling and how to wire it up maybe a little bit more efficiently in a future video when we're actually doing the replacings. For this one, we're just breaking it down. So to break it down, to take this buttstock off, it's actually really easy. Instead of pushing up here, right, and allowing it to stop there, we're actually just gonna pull this down. That gives us a lot more leverage, pulls that pin out further, we take it right off. If you look in here, see if I can show that to you. You see that, there it is, that pin right there goes down. When we squeeze it, right? Let's get it right there. When we squeeze it, it goes down just there, so not quite flush, right? So that'll keep it on there and stop it from sliding off when you're just adjusting the stock. But when we pull this, it goes completely flat, and that allows us to remove it. That pin in there, right there, slots into these holes on the bottom of the rear assembly. So this is how we can adjust it, and you see that this one is a 6-point adjustable rear assembly. So I'll show you how we replace that. It's going to be the same thing. Most of these buttstock replacements have the same system. They just have slightly different ways of making that that little bolt pull down. So we'll put this away as well. We'll continue on. Okay, so we have taken off our front handguard. We've taken off our buttstock. I'll pull off this just because now is as good a time as any. So this is a muzzle brake that came with this gun, and I really like it. It's not a bad one, but you can see it's really dirty, so we'll clean that up. But all barrel accessories on standard M4s and M16s and all those types of guns are actually threaded opposite of what's normal. So normally it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, right? Well, on this one, it's actually righty-loosey. So we're gonna turn to the right, and that'll come off, just like that, right? And these are standard threads. I think they're 1/18 inch. So I lied, and it's actually 1/2 by 28. So it means 1/2 inch outer thread diameter by 28 threads per inch. I'll leave a link to what that means in the description. Threads, so any 1/18 accessory will be able to thread onto this, and we actually got one, which again I'll go into in a future video. So nothing wrong with this. We'll keep this. This guy's nice, just need him to be cleaned up a little bit. All right, we'll pull this back over here. Readjust all these guys because I messed them up. Okay, so now this guy's kind of stripped down to just the pieces, the main pieces really. So rear assembly, front outer barrel, upper receiver, lower receiver, and our grip. So next thing we're gonna do is we're actually gonna separate the lower assembly with its rear assembly here. The lower receiver with its rear assembly from the upper receiver and the barrel. We're gonna take them apart. Very easy to do. So there's actually just 2 pins, one right here and one right here. I'm gonna take those out, and these will separate in a really clean way. So we'll do that. It's a little finicky. These guys are in there pretty tight. It's been a minute since I've taken this apart. So I'm actually gonna turn the gun over. I'm going to take anything heavy. Normally you could use a hammer, but really anything will work. We'll just take this reinforced screwdriver. I'm gonna put it right on that. I'm just gonna tap it on both of these, and that just gets it started for me. So both of those have started to come out. I'll talk about this rear one in a second. There's actually something else holding this in, and I'll get to that. But the front one comes right out just like that. It'll actually stay right here, so it'll stay stuck into that, and that's fine. You don't have to pull it out all the way. We'll leave it in actually, but there is inside this channel right here, this indent, there's actually, I don't know if you can see it, but there is a spring in there and a peg. Let's see if we can get this thing to focus. A peg that shoots out into the front bolt channel to stop it from being taken out all the way. So we'll leave it here. There's actually the same thing on this back one as well. You can remove the back one a little bit easier than you can the front one. So I'm not gonna worry about the front one as much. There's nothing wrong with leaving it there. It doesn't really hurt anything. But this back one, if we take that out, there we go, same idea. You can see there's a tiny bolt that shoots out into this and leaves them there. So that's okay, we'll leave those. But you would have to remove this castle nut, and I think I tightened that down. You'd remove this castle nut. This would, this little rear assembly piece right there would slide off, and you would be able to unscrew this bolt that's stuck in the back to get that all the way out. It's an Allen key, so it's a super tiny Allen bolt, sorry, that's in there, but you could do it, you could take it out. We won't worry about it today. Anyway, okay, so now that we have these 2 bolts taken out, this top will actually just slide off like that. It'll slide all the way forward, and voila, we have our lower assembly, or sorry, our lower receiver and our upper receiver, just like that. Okay, so here's our upper receiver. I'm gonna put the lower receiver to the side for a second while we deal with the upper, and I'll take you through everything that's in the upper real fast. Okay, so upper receiver. As we saw earlier, this is the outer barrel. There's actually an inner barrel in airsoft guns. So if we roll this over like this, I'm sure many of you veteran airsoft players, or I mean, shoot, even people who have taken apart their gun once, will recognize this. This is your hop-up unit, and it's attached to your inner barrel. So if we just slide it out like that, that's all it takes, right? So barrels are typically brass or steel. This one's brass. Classic Army makes fantastic barrels. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, except for that most airsoft guns come off the line with a 6.05. I mean, shoot, as wide as 6.08 in some cases, inner barrel. If we're shooting BBs that are 6 millimeters and we have a barrel that's 6.05 or 6.08 millimeters, I'm sure you can see the discrepancy there. We're gonna have a BB that has a lot of wiggle room inside that barrel. So we're gonna be replacing this with a tight bore. I'll get more into that in a future video. There's a lot that goes into choosing your barrel. Many people go with 6.03s because they're more forgiving, but I will touch on that later. For now, I just wanted to show you what this looks like. So this is a brass inner barrel. You can see right here we have our hop up. So there's a clip right here that actually clips into notches on this barrel to keep it in there. And there's a bucking in there, as well as a hop up arm and a nub inside that. We're actually going to be completely, we're not gonna use any of this. We're gonna replace this entire thing with a new inner barrel, a new hop up unit, a flat hop bucking. We're gonna S-hop our barrel, and I'll show you what that means. It's just using Sugru to create a flesh coating. And then we're also going to replacing this actual hop up unit and the adjustments with a Max ME hop up unit, which is gonna be super clean and give us a really nice inner barrel experience for our BBs. So they'll receive well, they'll get pushed through with a really nice air seal and a perfect hop that will completely cradle the BB as it goes out. So it'll be really nice. We're going to be replacing this with a much longer outer barrel and a much longer inner barrel. So our outer barrel is going to be going from, I think this is 14 inches, I believe. And we're going to be replacing this 14-inch barrel with a 20. So we're going to take this out 6 inches, and then we're going to be replacing this inner barrel, which is, I believe, 350, with a 509 millimeter inner barrel, which comes out to about 20 inches. So it'll come up all the way flush to the tip of our 20, and then we will be putting a 19-inch M-lock handguard over that, and we'll be putting some furniture on there as well, and I'll take you through all that and how to do it very, very soon. Okay, so that's this. We'll put this aside as well. You're going to be replacing this entire assembly. Okay, back to the upper receiver. So I showed you in the first part, that's not right. And if you look in there, you can see there's an arm right there. Sorry, let me use a screwdriver to point. There's an arm right there that should have a spring attached to it that attaches up here in the front. So right up here, it's hard to see, there you go. So there should be a spring that goes all the way here and put some tension on this guy. It's not there, but there is a spring right here on our dust cover. So if we pull this open, this guy should have popped down. It didn't. So there we go. I can come inside and make tension on this. So it looks like this has gotten bent somehow. I'll show you how to fix that in a future video as well. It'll be more of a minute maintenance thing. This isn't gonna affect the operation of the gun that much, except for this dust cover. When it's up, we can't access our hop-up settings. And if you're making fine adjustments in game, you need that to come down reliably. Yeah, see, that's not popping out, and it should. So it should be just like this. Let's see if we can, there it goes. So this is really bent out of shape. You can see there's a massive gap right there between the upper receiver body and that slide, and that's not good. We need that to be far more flush, so we'll fix that as well. But again, when you pull this back, when the inner barrel is in, your hop-up adjustment wheel sits right there inside all M4 pattern guns like this, and we need access to that. So, but we also want it covered most of the time. That way, when we pull this back, it pops down, we can adjust our hop-up, and then we can pop this back in and keep everything nice and covered. So that's a problem. We'll fix that as well. It's just going to involve using some pliers to make this a little bit more concave, this little assembly in here, so that it actually makes contact with the tiny, let me show if I can, there it goes. There's a tiny nub right there, and that's what's making contact with this upper body, right? So right there, where you can see it's been worn down from use a little bit. The slide, this little patch right here, fits this guy. So these line up, right? This bump, as you can see there. And when the front part of this slide pushes this out, this tiny little nub, we'll see if we can make it happen, actually contracts a bit, pops in. You can see it popping, the bottom of it popping out there as well. So that pops in, and this slide cover pops open, this dust cover pops open. And so we'll need to fix that as well. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, that's pretty much everything about this side of the upper receiver. Let's talk about this side for a second. So this is a front sight. This is a standard front sight pin. It uses pins here. Let's see if we can get better lighting on that as well. There we go. So it uses these pins right here to lock into slots on this outer barrel. So what we would have to do is we'd simply take this pin, you can see it right there, and we take a punch to these, punch those out, and then this guy would actually slide off really easily. I'm not going to do that because we're replacing the entire front barrel, but there's a bunch of videos on how to take off the pinnings on this front sight. This front sight also holds this front handguard assembly. You can see how loose that is. That's a lot of what contributes to this, to the rattle. And there's not a lot you can do to fix that except go with bigger pins, try to create some more tension in there so it's not as loose. I don't like that at all. I'm going to go with the free float 19-inch M-Lock handguard, and I'll show you how to install that. But first, let me show you how to uninstall this front barrel. So on the front of this, you'll notice these teeth right here. This is a standard full metal classic Army M15A4 that actually uses a real rifle barrel nut. That's what this is called, rifle barrel nut. All right, so we're gonna grab this guy, and you can see these teeth on this front part match up exactly with what's going on right there, and they're recessed. So you can see this is recessed as well. I simply have to put it in like this. I believe these guys are actually regular lefty loosey righty tighty, so we shouldn't have to do anything too crazy. Oh, yep, lefty loosey righty tighty. Sorry for all the noise, but we're just gonna take that off like so, and I'll show you how this comes apart. Okay, so we've loosened it pretty much enough. We can do the rest by hand, or should be able to do the rest by hand. Maybe not. It grabbed again, and that tells me there's actually probably quite a bit of buildup in here, so we'll have to address that as well. Okay, there we go, that's a little bit better. Looks like it's grabbing every half turn. That's fine, we'll keep taking this off like so. Okay. Here we go, that's a little bit better. Okay, so that's coming off by itself now. And just like that, that's a rifle barrel nut, and I'll show you the threading a little bit here. So this is what was keeping the barrel on, as well as the spring, the little springy setup for the rear part of the handguard. So this is what we were pushing down to release those. There's also a little tiny washer in here. Again, we're gonna be replacing all of this, so it doesn't too much matter. But after we take that barrel nut off, this guy comes out just like that. And this is what the inside assembly of an outer barrel looks like. So you can see all the way through there. This one's actually in pretty decent shape, besides all this mayhem up here. But this is all going away. So you'll see in here, we have our threads, and then this actually is spring loaded. So it's a 2-piece construction, rear barrel nut assembly. Okay, this is what we're left with. I'm gonna put this away. Okay, there we are. That is a upper receiver. We're gonna keep this. There's nothing wrong with it necessarily besides this whole assembly, but that's super fixable. That's just bending some really thin sheet metal here and replacing a spring, which we'll do. But that's enough for this. So we're gonna put this off to the side. We're good to go there. All right, back to our lower receiver here. We're now ready to start getting to the gearbox, and that's where the real gnarly stuff happens. We're gonna be making some updates to that for sure. First things first, we actually need to take off the handguard. This is where your motor is stored in an AEG. So this is where your all of your power is coming from, really. You'll have the wires come in through either the front or the back, and we're gonna be having them come in through the back, into the gearbox, down into the handle, and right actually down here into the bottom where there's 2 contacts, a positive and a negative, or a positive and a ground, if you will. And that's going to cause this motor to spin when the trigger is pulled. The trigger pull completes a circuit, and then the energy flows down here, and this spins and sets off all of the necessary mechanics to compress air into the barrel. Okay, so I'm actually gonna show you how that all works. We'll dive into this right now. So let's turn this up here. If you'll notice, there's 2 screws. So we have our 1 and 2. This guy is actually only used if we were to turn this thing into an HPA, or high pressure air gun. Your high pressure air feed would come into the bottom, up through this and into your gearbox, where you would have a setup to allow small bursts of air to fire the guns and cycle. So we don't need to worry about that. We just need this front and rear screw right here. So we'll do that now. But you'll notice that this guy is smaller than this rear one. So we need to keep those separate. This guy, longer one, goes in rear, front one goes in the, or short one goes in the front. So I'm gonna keep them in that orientation, where front guy is in the front here and rear guy is in the rear. Keep them just like that. But now this guy comes off. So very easily, we just pull that off like so. And I will keep that here as well in my tray. He's magnetic too, so it's perfect. We'll keep rear to rear, front to front. Okay. Now you'll notice in here you see 2 wires, and this is what I was talking about, your positive and your negative on your motor. This is your motor. These are often very tightly pushed in there to try to maximize the usage of the space, right? We want a big, powerful motor in there, high torque. They're mostly the same size in Airsoft. Some are a little skinnier, some are a little fatter. This edition of the Classic Army M15A4, they introduced a high torque motor, so we're gonna keep that, but it is a beefy motor, and it's pretty wedged in there. So very carefully, we're going to use a flathead screwdriver to pry it out after we release the contacts. So these are called female spade connectors, and they're going into male spade connectors that are actually part of the motor assembly. So first things first, we're just gonna put this under the lip of the female spade connector. I don't know if you can see that. We're just gonna pop it up like that. So we just put this under here and popped it up. Same thing on the rear. We're going to get underneath it. We're just gonna pop it up like so. There we go, and it's released. Get these out of the way, like so. And you can tell just by looking at these are beat up wires. We're gonna have to redo that, I can already tell. But that's besides the point. The motor looks to be intact. So if you'll notice, there's a little tiny lip right there underneath the black, and we can use that to latch into, keep our finger on the other side like so, create some tension and pull up, or try to. It might be really in there. Yep, okay, so that's not working. We're gonna have to go to pliers. We're gonna be very gentle. You see there's a lot of wiring there. We only want to put any tension on this black piece. That's what it's there for. It's there for bracing, and it's part of the main assembly of this gun, so we can actually latch onto it and pull it out with minimum damage. There we go. That's much easier. Okay, so this is the motor. This is what an AEG motor looks like. It is a very, very compact unit for how much power it can put out. And this is the pinion gear. So this actually sits here in this gearbox, or sorry, in the handle, in the handguard here, and goes up into the base of the gearbox, where 3 other gears are used to release this spring repeatedly. And I'll show you, we'll get into that in a second. But this, sitting right here, is what it looks like. And this is in great shape, actually. There's a little bit of grease buildup here on the head. We can take that away, no problem. But this is in fantastic shape. That's really nice. So there's nothing wrong with that. It looks like all the contacts are in good shape as well. Okay, we'll put that off to the side. Do not put this in the magnet tray. I just don't like doing that. There's magnets in this that cause it to spin, and I am not in the mood to accidentally damage this somehow by putting it near other magnets. So keep that off to the side. Keep our magnets over here. Okay, now that we have these guys out here and the motor out, there's actually 2 screws. You can faintly see them. One right here, another right here. So on opposite corners of this. And we're gonna take those out. So you're probably not gonna be able to see it. There's no way I could show you in there. But if you're doing this and following along, you'll be able to see them plain as day. They're not hidden or anything. They're just on the base. All right, just like that, our handguard comes off. The screws are actually still in there. Sometimes they'll stick into their sockets, which is fine. As long as we keep this upright like this, they won't fall out. And now you'll see there's 2 holes here. I'll try to carefully show you this. I'm gonna let the screws fall out in my hand if I can. Oh, they're stuck in there, that's good. So there's 2 holes here where the wires come in. So those 2 larger spots on this handguard, and I'll take these out. There we go. So keep my hand under here, or try to. Okay, so this main hole right here, right there, that's where the pinion gear comes out. And then these holes on either side are where you have your positive and negative wires respectively. Or sorry, negative and positive wires. Sorry, this is the front. So positive comes out the front, negative goes in the back. That's usually how this is set up. And then you have your screws here. There's room for 2 other screws as well. I don't know why this one only has 2. It looks like someone might have been in here before, which is fine. But we'll probably try to add 2 identical screws to this just to give our handguard, or sorry, our rear grip more sturdiness. But other than that, this is in great shape. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not seeing any tears on the holes here. I'm not seeing too much. There's no stripping on the screws or anything like that. Handguard's in good shape, so nothing wrong with that. We'll leave that right next to our motor here. The screws are still in there and they seem to be secure, so that's fine. All right. Here's one thing that I noticed when the first time I took this gun apart, and I've taken it apart once before. This and this, technically these wires are intact, and I'll show you how to test that. But this guy had been stripped because he was originally wired into the gearbox right next to the pinion gear, and it caught, which is bad. Having frayed wires inside a gearbox is the easiest way to ruin a whole bunch of good work. So we're gonna have to replace these. I just put them back in for the sake of taking this apart for you guys, but that is definitely not good. This is actually some tape. It's been wound around to stop the wires from being frayed, and I only did that because I was testing the continuity of this wire and I didn't want to accidentally shock myself. So this was more of a band-aid than it is a long-term fix. If you see something like this, get new wiring. It's just not worth putting something like this back in your gun. Okay, so we've got all that off. We have most of the wiring done, most of the wiring exposed, minus what's inside here. But this is just the back half. The other part of the wiring is currently in this rear tube. It used to go out the front, but to take this guy out, we also need to get the rest of the wiring free because it's all coming into the gearbox. So to do that, all we're going to do is take out this Allen key first. That'll take off the rear stop on this rear tube. Then we'll take off this rear tubing, which will allow the wires to be pulled out. So first things first, we'll find the right size Allen. This was made with European units, so it's in millimeters. So we're going to be looking at the millimeter Allen keys here. If this was made in Imperial units, then you would be using SAE, but it is not. So we will be looking at the millimeters. Okay, so this comes off like that. And that Allen screw is right there. And again, magnetic tray, putting it in there with this guy right next to it so that we know where it came from. Okay, next, I could go straight into removing this rear barrel, but I wanted to show you this first. This is a castle nut. You can tell because it looks like a turret on a castle. So all we're gonna do is we're actually gonna use this same guy right here with these three, or this guy, to get onto this and actually undo him very quickly. So we'll use this guy, there's nothing wrong with that. Slide it onto this, and it slots right into that castle nut. And again, this is righty tighty, lefty loosey. So we just go like that, loosen them up. These guys break very easily, and it just comes off like that. Normally what would be sitting here, I actually have it, is a rear sling assembly. So this would sit underneath this guy, and this castle nut would tighten down on this. And I'll put that back on maybe at the end. I don't like this one, it's been beat. You can see that it is bent just a touch out of shape there. And it's got a lot of wear and tear on it from somebody having a sling on this. So 50-50 on whether or not I want to put this back on for now, but we'll see. All right, anyway, we've got this rear off, we've got this castle nut undone. Not that it needed to be, but hey, we did it anyway. There is actually a Phillips head. Let's see if I can get a light on this for you. There's actually a Phillips head screw. There you can kind of see it. There you go, that's better. Just at the base there. You'll also see I have my wires coming out of this, and I'll show you how I did that here in just a second. So we're gonna take our screwdriver, straight down, find that screw, just by feel, there it is, and we're gonna undo that. Okay, that sounds like it's free and feels like it too. And boom, our rear tubing comes off and our rear wiring comes out. Maybe. There we go. So that guy was actually finicky, and you can tell that these aren't the right sizes because, hey, I've taken this apart and I wired them back there just for the sake of example. But inside this, if I turn this upside down, this is what comes out. This is a washer and a screw that go into this, sit in a recess in here so that the washer has something to tension against, and they screw into this. So I'll show you just kind of like this. This screw sits in here, and the rear tube would be right here. So there's a little lip inside this that sits in between this rear support on the receiver and this washer. And so as you screw this in, it tightens that down. And you'll notice I did some stuff to this rear washer. This didn't originally come with the ability to be rear wired. Not completely anyway, there's some allowances they made. But this wasn't one of them. So when the wires come into this rear tubing, this washer used to be completely round, and it would sit completely on that recess, not allowing our wires to get through the tube and into a rear battery stock if I wanted to have that. So what I had to do is I cut out 2 notches. You can see that on this rear washer that allow my wires to pass through that join made against the rear tube so that I can get them out and into the rear assembly, or sorry, into the stock. So just a little allowance we had to make. I would do this with a Dremel and a grinding bit. It's really easy to do, took me like 5 minutes, and it allowed me to rear wire my gun. So I recommend that. Again, we'll put that on our magnetic tray. This guy has nothing else. It's really just a tube with a castle nut, and then that guy that secured it to our assembly here. So that's a side as well. Let's get into how this all goes together. So this is, you can see our rear wires coming out here. In this current setup, this black wire does not actually need to go inside this gearbox. It's actually passing through a small channel just behind the gearbox, and I'll show you that as well. But our red wire is going into it. You also, I want to take a second here. This gun stopped firing, actually. When it was all back together, it stopped firing. And I tested these lines, and I found out that it was actually this. So this is a fuse assembly. And this is super important, and we're going to be replacing this, but this makes it so that if there is ever a power surge inside your AEG, this fuse breaks before anything else does. And that's really important as well. So I'll show you, let's open this up. I'll show you how to test for this. But if you can see here on this fuse, there's actually a break between those ends. Let's see if it'll focus. There you go. So there's actually a fuse broken between those 2 ends. I'll try to do a whole like makeup, a hand behind the makeup palette thing that all those famous YouTubers do. There you go. So you can see that those aren't touching anymore. That's the point of a fuse. It's a planned point of failure. This is set up to have 30 amp fuses, which means that any spike over 30 amps is gonna break this fuse and stop the gun from firing, which is good, because if we're using LiPo batteries and we have power surges, it's not okay. There is a massive problem somewhere. That can come from again, frayed wire, so bad. It can come from a bent wire, which happens to break inside, also bad. Or it can come from a bad LiPo or a bad motor. There's a bunch of places that something could be going wrong, but this protects you, because if you have a power surge and that LiPo starts acting up and it explodes, that's a huge problem. That is a massive safety issue. This is gonna save you from having that happen. Instead of just allowing the gun to overheat and then boom, your LiPo explodes. LiPo batteries are not your friend. They are controlled explosives that we happen to think are really useful for airsoft. So just keep that in mind. We'll go over how to keep this gun safe as we build it back up in a little bit of a different configuration. So that's what this is. Again, this is a male spade connector that goes to this female spade connector. So these just go in like this, and then this is the same thing with this ground. The fuse goes on the positive side, so it goes on the red side. I don't like these types of fuses as much. They're great, they're inline, they're super small and easy to use, but we're going to be replacing this with a much better fuse. So we are going to use inline fuses that actually have fuse plugs. So you'll have a 30 amp fuse that looks like this little green guy. It just plugs in there. You cap this off and boom, you're good to go. So the way you would fix this, we're going to be soldering. We're going to cut this line, take it down pretty close to where the housing is here, and solder this into our wires towards the battery. We're going to keep this someplace that we can get to it. So we'll actually have this in the stock along with a MOSFET, and I'll show you what a MOSFET is as well. But this will keep us safe and allow us to make sure that we're not shorting anything. We're not putting our battery in a situation that it could overheat and hurt us. It's just a really simple way to keep yourself happy, healthy, and whole as you're playing airsoft. So I wanted to show you what that was. What I can do is, if you do have a gun that's not firing, I'll show you how to test that real quick. So you'll need this. This is a simple digital multimeter. This is what you'll use when you're testing batteries, when you're testing all sorts of stuff. There's a bunch of different things it can do. We are going to be testing the continuity of a wire. And the way we do that is we are going to use ohms. So this little omega symbol right here is ohms, and that means resistance. So if we're testing with these prongs a continuous line, we should get resistance, right? We should get some sort of small resistance telling us, hey, this line is good, and you're getting a reading off of it, but there's some amount of resistance in between 1 and 2. Resistance, think of it as exactly as it sounds. It's resisting current. Now I know that's kind of counterintuitive for a good line having resistance, but you'll actually have way more resistance if the line is bad. You'll have infinite resistance because there is no signal getting through. So all we're going to do is we're going to turn this on. We're going to turn our dial here to the little 200 in the omega section. So 200, just like that. And we're getting a 1. It's not actually 1, it's an I. It stands for infinity. So we're having infinite resistance because there is no signal making it from red to black. If I touch these, oh, you see we're getting resistance because there is a good signal, but it's being resisted just because wires do have some signal attenuation. So you're going to lose some power. So very simple to test. Let's look at just this guy right here. This should, if the fuse was intact, this should be a complete line and we should get resistance. So let's put our digital multimeter there. I'll stick this guy in this side. So that's making contact with that male spade connector. And this side and the other side, making contact with this small Tamiya. These are called small Tamiya connectors. So you see we're still at infinite. So that means that this line is broken. How can I tell that? Well, if we go inside this fuse box and we put, if we test the connection from here to here, well, yeah, we're getting some resistance, so this is good. But if we go just on the other side of that fuse, we can tell that it's broken. Same idea, we could even go even closer and say, hey, just either side of the fuse, yeah, that's broken, so that means that fuse is not intact. If you were to test the other fuses, you would get resistance. We can also test these lines, so these are also good to test. So let's put one contact on one side of the positive wire. We'll just get it right there. Do this guy on the other side. See if I can finagle this. Oh, there we go. So this positive line, oh, it looks like it's not working, but it is, right? This is because the trigger is not depressed. So if we were to press the trigger and do that again, and I can do that, let's just stick this guy in here, like so. Stick this guy in here like so. We can test our trigger contacts as well this way. So I'll put this onto semi on the other side and I'll pull the trigger and we're getting resistance. So that means our entire trigger assembly is okay, right? We're getting a good contact from that trigger contact. So let's test our black as well. And there you go. We're getting good contact through there. So this is a good line, but it could be better. Just because of the wear and tear on this, I would not, again, put either of these back in the gun. They need to be replaced, and we'll do that as well. Anyway, that's how you can test the continuity of a line to see whether or not it's good. Again, it was just this one where the fuse is broken, it's bad. We're gonna replace all of it anyway. So we're gonna do a complete strip down and rewire. And I'll show you guys how to do that in a future video. So put this away. We've got our wires all undone here, so now there's nothing really holding I'll put this guy off here. This is just a rear, essentially a rubberish, it's more of a composite plastic washer that kind of sits all this stuff together, but that's besides the point. We'll take that off. There's not too much else holding rear to top, except there was two things, and I actually already took them off just because it involved hammering. So one is a pin right here, and that's what this is. This pin, if you can see, sits inside this, and it's part of the trigger semi-assembly. So you're just gonna have to hammer that out. We're gonna put it back in when we're reassembling the gun, and I'll show you how to do that later. But for now, you just tap it out, you put that there. It's magnetic, you definitely don't wanna lose that. It's super important to the semi-automatic function of your gun. Secondly, over here, well, I guess I did put this back on, this guy. So you need to take this off, otherwise we're not going to be able to take off our mag release. And our mag release is actually holding our gearbox in to where it's at right now. There's a little hole, I don't know if you can see this, but I'll press our get this light up here. I'll press our mag release, and let's see if you can see that. See that right there? That little silver thing in the middle is part of gearbox. So they use the mag release as a holder to keep that intact, as well as use that to guide the mag release. It's a symbiotic relationship, if you will. So turn that off. Okay, so we're gonna have to take this off. And to do that, we're going to have to take this off first. This is held in with a tiny pin, and it sucks to get out, but we're gonna do it anyway. You need a very small screwdriver or punch. So I use just a little Husky set. It has a punch in here as well, which is super, super convenient. I'm actually not gonna use that one though, because we have to really get in there. On your gun, it will be much the same. Just find a punch that fits the size as best you can. I'm only gonna use, I don't wanna break it, so we are going to use just a pair of pliers to punch that out. All right, that's better. So that comes out just like that. I'm going to leave this, this pin here. I'm just gonna take this guy out. So just like that, you'll see this is a lever that actually presses down on a springed part. And I took this out before, so I apologize, but this is part of our semi-assembly, and I will show you where that goes in the next video. But there's a spring involved, and it is very finicky. So for now, just take this out and don't lose them. Keep the pin in the low receiver if you can. It just makes it really easy to figure out where it goes later. There's a couple pins since there's a couple pins, we want to know where that is. Okay, so now that we have this out, this is a very weird part. We're going to press down on our mag release. You'll see when I do that, this other side pops up. We need to take this and spin him counterclockwise to unscrew him. And we couldn't do that when this guy was in, so we had to take that out first. So this is all I'm doing now. I'm just spinning this guy counterclockwise. You might have to keep some pressure on the mag release here. I'm just gonna keep spinning him like so. And there he goes. And he comes out just like that. There's a spring in there, so be careful. Try to show you that again. There you go, see that spring? We're gonna have to be very careful when we release this, but it's not too bad. Just keep an eye on it. Okay. And that spring comes out just like that. Keep this all together if you can. So I usually put the spring right back on, grab my mag release button, and just screw that onto the top as well. So we keep this all together. And again, this goes in the magnet dish, just like that. Okay. So there is now nothing holding our gearbox to our lower receiver. We are just going to slowly pull it out, but we have to push down the trigger to do so. So we pull this, and this is so finicky, but yeah, we're pulling, it's hard to show you as well. So we're pulling our trigger down and pulling this guy out and up. So it gets caught on that lip, but we have to pull it forward, and then it all comes out just like so. Okay. Remember, I wired our ground wire outside of the mag. So I'm gonna pull this out, or sorry, outside of the gearbox. So I'm gonna pull that out and put that off to the side. We're gonna be replacing it, so it doesn't really matter what you do with it. We'll throw that over there. Okay. We now have our lower receiver with just these pins left in it. That's fine, we're gonna take that off to the side. Let's talk about the gearbox. So this is, these things are so complicated. They really are. At least the first time you open it up, it gets a little easier to understand, but there's still a lot of small pieces, and we really need to keep track of them all. So I'm gonna make space on my magnet tray here and move over these guys that I know go together, move over our pin, move over this guy with its little spring. Okay, Okay, so there's screws on the top. The screw here, 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 and here. We need to take them all out and then carefully open up this gearbox. So we're going to do that, but there's two things we need to remember to do first. One, this spring is under tension, so are all the gears, and then also this spring in the back is compressed. This is our spring that is giving all the horsepower to the cylinder slamming forward and pushing air out the front, which pushes the BB. So, first things first, in the rear of your gearbox, there's a hole. Your spring guide is in there. Put a screwdriver in there like that, and that is going to allow us to keep pressure just with our palm on this spring to keep it from exploding and everything going everywhere, which would be a mess. You'd never find everything, I promise you. So, keep that there. We are then going to keep one hand here and methodically go through all of these screws while keeping pressure on the gearbox shell. Okay, here's the tricky part. Keeping pressure on everything, we're going to go back to having our left hand, or your right hand if you have this flipped for some reason, if your screws are on the other side for whatever reason. But I'm going to keep my left hand here. I'm going to keep my entire palm here. We're going to take a flathead. We'll do a crossover each here. We're going to take a tiny flathead screwdriver from this. Right, so I've got my tiny flathead screwdriver here, and we are going to just carefully pry open. You can see that already broke a little bit. We're going to carefully work our way around the gearbox and just pry it open a little bit. We don't want anything flying out, so just on the edges, we're going to work our screwdriver in there and pry up, and that. There's a little pop you'll hear. That tells me that this is ready to open. We are going to slowly open this just like we're peeling back the top of a sheet here. Everything in here is under quite a bit of tension, like I said. There's also shims on these gears, and I'll show you what those are, but they're little tiny washers that make sure all the alignment of the gears is correct. We don't want to lose those. If we lose those, you are in a bad spot. You'll have to re-shim everything, which is a bit of a pain. It's a little bit of trial and error as well. So we don't want to lose those. I'm just going to peel this back slowly, again, keeping pressure on this screwdriver with my left hand. I'm just going to peel this back as gently as we can. You heard that pop. Okay, and just like that, I'm gonna peel the back open. Okay, so now you see everything here. Just like that, I'm going to carefully transfer. We're keeping pressure on this back part because that's where the spring tension is. So at the front of the cylinder, I am going to get my screwdriver and I'm going to push the spring in and then slowly release the tension out. And there we go. We have now released the tension on this gearbox. So I'm going to take my spring out like this. We'll just go through each of these pieces systematically. So first one, this is your spring. It goes into a spring guide. The spring guide sits in the rear of the gearbox towards the top and makes sure that this spring consistently goes back and forth in line like it is supposed to. All right, so this sits back here. You'll see there's two notches. There's two notches on either side, and they sit in little openings on this gearbox in the back of this gearbox that correspond to those notches to keep it from spinning. So it'll stay just like this, like it's supposed to. Spring goes back and forth. All right, spring guide. Put that to the side. Don't need to magnetize him. He's not losing anything. There are actually washers on this, but they're normally held in place, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. Let's look at these gears real quick. I'll put this up towards you guys. you'll notice there's some washers on this gear, as well as this gear, and a slightly raised bevel on this gear. That's what shimming is. That makes sure that when we close the shell on these gears, they line up perfectly with each tooth, with each layer to the gear beneath it, to make sure that the operation is completely smooth and friction-free. So very important we don't lose those. This is the bevel gear, this is the spur gear, and this is the sector gear. And they're all aptly named because that's exactly the functions that they provide. So the bevel gear, we're going to take out first. We're also going to take out the tappet plate, which is this piece, and then we'll take out the cylinder as well as the piston. But I'm going to walk through what each of these pieces are and how they work as we do this. So first of all, let's take off this spring attached to the tappet plate. We're going to use our tiny tool again. We're going to grab this spring off of this front post here and release the tension that's sitting on this tappet plate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this underneath that, keeping a little bit of pressure on this. I'm going to slide it forward and up. If it wants to cooperate, trying to be very gentle. Again, can't go too slow on this. And that's sprung off, so I didn't do it quite as I expected, but you would want to slide it onto this and slide up, and then that spring comes off. But that's all it is. This pushes this tappet plate forward, and I'll show you why. So we'll put their spring, again, we're going to put it back in our magnetic box off to the side so we can find it. So here's how this gearbox works. The entire process is kicked off by the trigger, as you can see here in this diagram, making contact with the front contacts, aka completing the circuit. So when it completes the circuit, the electricity flows down those wires, down the red wire specifically, into the motor and the pinion gear. Then the pinion gear moves the bevel gear counterclockwise. The bevel gear, then moving counterclockwise, moves the spur gear clockwise. And the spur gear turns the sector gear backwards, which those teeth at the top lock into the teeth on the piston and move the entire thing backwards, compressing the spring and then releasing the spring forward. You can also see on the sector gear a small nub that is pushing back the tappet plate, which pushes back the air nozzle at the front of this diagram here. That then loads the next BB into the hop-up chamber, seals that chamber as it moves forward, and then when the spring finally shoots the piston into the cylinder, the air releases that BB down the barrel and towards its target. So there is a tiny little thing. We'll pull out our bevel gear here real quick, making sure there's no shimming that we've missed. And pull this out off to the side. This is the anti-reversal latch, and it catches teeth on the bottom of the bevel gear. It's kind of like a safety catch, so make sure that this doesn't spin backwards. It's only going to spin in one direction. And I'll show you how it does that. So this guy is under spring pressure, like so, and it sits right here inside the gearbox, inside this little hole. So this has pressure put on it, and this bevel gear has a catch. I don't know if you can see it, but that middle ring has these little catches. And so as this is spinning, and I'll put this back in, as this receives power from the motor, it spins this way, right? So it always spins counterclockwise. As soon as it tries to spin that way, you see it catches because of this little thing. So this thing allows it to spin this way, catches on each of those nubs, and as soon as it tries to spin backwards, it catches and it doesn't. So that's what function this thing plays. And I'll show you how to put that back in. It's a pain, but you can definitely do it. There's a little trick I found. It makes it very easy, or much easier. But there's a little tiny spring on that thing. It's a pain, just don't lose it. So keep special care to not lose track of that guy. Anyway, this is bevel gear. Like I said, this top row of teeth is where the pinion coming in from the motor, so let's grab the motor. Motor sits right here. Bevel gear sits right here. Oop. Let's put this guy back in place. Okay. This guy is pressed up into this. You see those teeth engage with that top row of teeth. So as this spins, so does this, right? So it engages in there. And that's what sets all of this in motion. So we'll go through it. As this is spinning, right? As this is spinning, like so, and this guy is being a pain, so let's get him out of there. Again, this is the catch, don't lose him. So as this spins counterclockwise, all of these gears turn. You'll see this one up here, the tappet plate is normally forward. As this gear spins, that little peg right there catches, pulls back on this tappet plate and the spring, and allows a BB to feed in and this entire piston to grab air. So you'll see that tooth catches up there on this piston, pulls the piston back, pulls this nozzle back. This fills with air as this spins, right? So as this spins, it fills with air. And then as soon as our last of our, I think it's 19 teeth or something like that, 14 teeth, as soon as the last one is caught, that's why it's called the sector gear, it's sectioned. So teeth and no teeth. This comes back as soon as this little peg clears this tappet plate. It forces a complete seal from the nozzle to the hop-up unit to the barrel, so it's one solid unit. And as soon as this last tooth releases this piston, boom, the spring, which is putting tension inside this piston, fires this forward, pushing all the air through this nozzle into the complete hop-up unit, sealed down the barrel, and shoots the BB out. So that's how this all goes together, right? And that's why there's a spring on this tappet plate. It's to allow this nozzle to go forward and make complete seal. Okay, so that's the gears. I'll start taking these out. We're gonna remove these. First of all, I'm not gonna replace any of the gears. Classic Army did a fantastic job on this gearbox. I mean, this is revered as a fantastic gearbox. These are all steel gears. All the teeth are intact. We don't see any wear and tear on this. It's really in great shape. The only thing I'm going to do is re-grease these and clean them off first. Well, clean them off and then re-grease, right? And then put them back in. I'm also going to put what's called a sector delay on this sector gear, and it's going to keep our tappet plate open for longer, which will allow BB to feed and make sure that this piston gets all the air it needs. So it's going to hold this nozzle open longer to allow us to do that. I mean, I'll show you why that's important later. I'll get into the science of it, as this is the Airsoft Scientist channel. It would only be appropriate, right? Okay, so let's take out our gears first. I'm gonna take out this gear. Again, making sure that any washers or shimming need to remain intact. These are all magnetic, so you can keep them in your magnet tray if you have one. If not, just do your best to keep them intact. We're also going to take out our cylinder assembly, as well as our tappet plate. I'll show you how these are built. Again, we'll dive into those. This has a shim on it, so I'm being very careful. Also looks like there's a intact shim underneath, but it's held in with grease, so we're okay. I'm just gonna put it in our magnet tray together, and we'll take out our spur gear as well. You can also see that down here, these are all bearing holdings, so these are gonna make it really friction free as these are spinning. You should be able to put one of these in here, and it should be able to spin freely. There's a little bit of grease under there, giving it some friction because of the buildup. See, there's a lot of buildup there. Oop, and I just dropped a shim. Let's be very careful to put that exactly back on where it was. But you can see there's a lot of buildup here, so we're gonna have to clean that. There's also a shim on the top of this gear, so I'm just gonna be extremely careful as I keep these separated. Okay, so now that we have that, we can see our trigger assembly is the only thing left. Now watch what happens when I pull the trigger. This is still intact. It's under a little bit of pressure, so be careful with it. But see this little metal piece up there making contact with this metal plug, if you can see that. So as that metal goes forward, it's making contact in there. Oop, and the spring wants to come out, so we're just gonna allow this to happen. So the spring, the trigger is held in just on a post. It's like sandwiched on each side on these little nubs, and there's a spring underneath it that allows the trigger to function. And it'll sit like that, and then you would put this against the front plate of this gearbox right here and seat this back in, and it would function just fine. But we're not going to do that. We're trying to take this all apart so we can work on the gearbox. That's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to keep these together and put these off to the side. So I routed these positive lines from the front down through the gearbox. You can see there's a channel built for them, and they're now going out the back. They didn't used to. So only one of these used to go down through the gearbox into this channel and down to the motor, which is sitting right here, right? Normally. This would go down into the handguard then and post up into this positive terminal, which you can see right there. This would just go on just like that, right? Just like so. This one actually went out the front of the gun through a opening in the front, which I'll show you right here. So that allowed this cord to come up and out through the front of the gun like so, right? And that would allow us to then front wire the gun. I hate that, not a fan of it. So we're going to double wire these guys down. This is where it gets tricky. I would highly recommend having your cable that's going all the way through the gearbox to be the one that you sit in the bottom of this channel. The reason being, remember, we have a giant high torque motor flying in from the handle right there. That is very low clearance, and this is actually what stripped this this ground wire that we had. This ground wire was wired from the front of the gun down into the hand well. So this came in like this, and it actually sat right here, if I can get this in, like so. And see the problem with that, that's right where the gear is. That's gonna get stripped every time. If not from actually grabbing the teeth, then just from the friction of having this spin constantly on top of it. That's bad. Don't love that. So we're taking this out. We're gonna keep wires outside of the gearbox if we at all can. Just in this case, we have to have at least this red wire come through because I don't want to make any other holes on the gearbox that weren't already there. Theoretically, what you could do is you could have this wire come down right here and out. I could make this hole larger and wire this through, down, and around inside the handle to try to avoid the motor as much as possible. It's just not built for that, and any alterations I make to the gearbox will weaken it. I don't want to put any more holes or channels in here, so we're just going to be very careful when we wire our new red wire, because we're going to be redoing this through. We're going to keep that flush. I might even put just a drop of super glue on the underside of whatever I do to just keep it flush to that gearbox. Again, you don't need a lot, you would just need a small drop, but that would allow it to be free of any friction coming through, right? So we just want it to be very flush with that channel. Anyway, we're going to be undoing these, resoldering the whole nine, so we do have to take this apart. I'm actually just going to take off the front slide here. So there's a screw on the front part of this that is holding our solder into contact with our trigger assembly here that's completing the circuit. So we actually can just take off the front of that if I'm careful. There we go. Okay, I like using magnetized screwdrivers as well. Again, we're putting these in a separate tray because they are a little finicky. Okay, we're now going to take out this tiny screw right here. looks like this screw actually isn't magnetic, which is funny. This is made of a non-ferromagnetic metal then, which would be something like tin or potentially even aluminum. That's interesting. Yeah, and he's not magnetized to my magnet holder. That's funny. Okay, that's why my magnetic screwdriver didn't work. Anyway, we now have taken this apart. You see there's a spring up here holding this trigger, the trigger contact back. So we're going to do the same thing we tried to do with our tappet plate. We're going to try to gracefully release the tension on this by coming up here. Ooh, let's actually change out the head I'm using on that. I want to use a smaller screwdriver head. We're going to just carefully pull back on that. There we go. And we've released tension. So we'll keep the screw there for now, or sorry, the spring there for now. Actually, I might put him with the other. Yeah, we'll put him in the magnet tray. Okay. So now this is mostly apart. We can just take this entire trigger unit out like this. Make sure you realize how everything goes together. Just study it very quickly. It's not hard. There's three main pieces. You have trigger contact that slides into this. Or sorry, you have, there we go. Let me show you. So we have this piece, which is our trigger contact. That's what slides forward into this plug that you'll see there. And that sits right there. And then we have our contact plate, which keeps our first contact pinned to this front. There's a little post there you can see. You can see there's some patina on this. We'll clean that up. We'll unsolder this and resolder it to our new wires. And then there's our other connector as well, which comes out right like that. So we are going to resolder these as well. Okay, let's talk about our piston and cylinder head for a second now that we've got all this apart. So this is, let's take all this. This is a piston. There's 4 pieces here actually. Well, technically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 pieces here really. So this is our cylinder. This is a ported one that comes with your classic Army gun. I'll tell you why it's ported here in a second. This is our piston with a piston head. So this is technically 2 pieces. You can see it's screwed in right there, right? And then this is our cylinder with a cylinder head. You can see this is cut out like that. Our tappet plate and our air nozzle. So this is our nozzle that sits right inside this tappet plate. You can see it's actually slotted to fit like that. And this, as the gun cycles, is what's opening to create more air intake or closing to create a solid seal with the hop-up unit. So it comes out like that, right? Just cycles just like so, okay? So take that out. We are going to be replacing all of this, and I'll show you why. So this is the cylinder that cycles, or sorry, the piston that cycles, and as it cycles back and forth, it pushes air out the front, right? Which means that we need to have a good seal, and that's why you have this O-ring here. It presses up against the sides of the piston, takes in air, and then pushes it out, right? So it takes in air, and then when this goes forward, it pushes it out, since this is now slotted into the hop-up when it's compressing. Okay, so here's a problem. This assembly needs to be airtight, right? So if I were to open the piston like so, it wouldn't be airtight until I get past the port. This port is to allow more air in, that's the reason it's there. And then as soon as it goes past there, I should be able to hold down the front of this and not press these together, which for the most part I can. This is fine. Here's the problem though. We're putting a 509mm barrel, tight bore, granted, but 509mm barrel on this gun. This air volume from here to here is not sufficient to get a BB all the way down 509mm of barrel. And I'll get into that in the video where we're dealing with that. But that's not sufficient. Additionally, we need to change this nozzle because the nozzle, when put onto the tip of this, should still stop air from getting out. And it kind of does, but there's still leakage. I can press it. Right, that's a problem. That means air is escaping somewhere. We should also be able to, when the nozzle is like that, stop from pressing. And I can't. It immediately breaks the seal. So that's an issue. Because that means that there's something wrong in there. There's something not keeping air. It's okay. Like I would use this in another gun that has a shorter barrel. There's nothing theoretically a problem with it. It's just not as sealed as I would like. I think we can make some improvements here. There's a few places that can happen. This could be a bad O-ring. It's not really, just because we just tested it and it's okay without this on. Like this is an okay air seal. So most likely it is this nozzle. It's the problem. But you could also have leaks around this. These are actually two pieces, this blue and this cylinder, two separated pieces. But then there's also the tappet plate, which could be not moving and cycling this guy back and forth, which would create a bad air seal as well. We're going to be replacing the tappet plate because, as you can see, it's a little warped. It actually curves up just a touch, which means it's getting old. And if you look really closely, you probably can't see it on the camera, but there's just a little bit of stress that I can see in this arm, a little bend I can see right there. So we're going to be replacing this with a reinforced one, a brand new one. Okay, that is taking apart the gun. We'll get this back up. You can see all the damage we've done. All right, so we have taken everything apart. The next video, we're gonna go in reverse. So we're gonna put together our new assembly for our cylinder. We are going to put it back into the gearbox. We're going to reassemble the gearbox, and then we'll do the inner barrel. We'll be replacing that, and then we'll do all the other goodies like replacing the all the furniture and whatnot. Thanks, guys.